This next story is not horrific at all. I'm not even going to say any kind of warning before I start to read it. This one is called The Oracle Robot. Let me tell you a story. The little shop hadn't even been open for a whole month and there was already a queue around the block. Everybody wanted to meet the Oracle Robot, and anyone would pay the modest sum of $25 Canadian to have him read their palm and predict their future. His fame was only due to the fact of being the novelty, or that was at least what the rest of the fortune tellers of Swindle Street hoped. If they had been better, or at least slightly good at their predictions, they could have hoped nothing but known exactly what was in store for them. And they could have acted differently, of course. Truth be told, the reason for the Oracle Robot's success was simple. Upon shaking his clients' hands, he took a small sample of their blood and used it to perform a superchemistry panel of 42 tests during the session. With the results, he warned them of possible diseases they could suffer in the future, hence why he called himself a seer, if they didn't take care of themselves. With the steep prices of insurance and medical consultation, many people would even pay up to $30 Canadian for such a service and still consider it a real bargain. The Oracle Robot was also much better than the self-diagnosis they were accustomed to, especially when they searched for their symptoms in several pages and medical forums on the internet and ended up with the same erroneous, most of the times, result. You have cancer and possibly a stroke right now, at this very moment. And if you subscribe to our webpage for just $75 American monthly, you will have access to our home paramedics program, who will go resuscitate you and discuss the terms of a health plan that suits your needs and economic possibilities. However, the fortune tellers of Swindle Street were a little too obtuse to comprehend that there was no magic behind the people's preference of a cold seer that, instead of flesh and bones, was made of metal and wires. It was the third meeting they arranged, and no matter what, they would have to find a solution to their problem in that one. In the first one, they had decided they needed to find out the exact nature of their rival service. They sent one of them, named Ryan, to get his fortune told by the Oracle Robot, which was a little devious because con men weren't supposed to con each other. Of course, there also was that old and wise saying that reminded them that there was no honor among thieves. Of course, it was a disaster. The spy returned crazy, possibly from being exposed to things his mind couldn't wrap around. Now, the only thing he did was tell jokes about ghosts and robots. And they were bad ones. A ghost goes into a bar and he's served by the bartender, who is a robot. Because robot comes from the Czech word robota, which means slavery. Because he's there every night, serving drinks to anyone who wants them, even if his customers are dead. It's funny because robots are slaves. At their second meeting, they decided that they couldn't change the strategy because they hadn't found out the Oracle Robot's secret for success. What they did choose better was the fortune teller they sent, an ambitious young man named Roy, who had all his marbles in the right place. The bad thing was that the spy not only failed to return to them, but turned into an evangelist of that odious metal being who was taking them out of business. Apparently, the robot had offered him a juicy fixed salary if he decided to change sides, and also a very attractive dental plan. The fortune tellers couldn't sit idly by while the clientele escaped them. Besides, their patience was running out. The time of investigation was past. They had to act. In that third meeting, they decided that the best thing they could do was to fight fire with fire. It wasn't cheap. Building a robot client required state-of-the-art artificial intelligence, mainly because the existing neural networks had been created to provide services, not demand them. In fact, the guy at the electronics store mocked them slightly when they bought the software they needed for their little grand project. They ended up having to program a big part of his artificial brain, but managed to make him work correctly in 83% of his interactions with other humans and interfaces. He even burnt the bread instead of toasting it in only 3% of his tries, and that was because the electronic oven wasn't up to date and envied his shiny aquamarine finish. After a brief testing period, they finally sent the client robot to clash with the Oracle. The shop was horrible. There were no crystal balls and no tarot decks. There was no incense and no glass beads hanging from the ceiling. There were no posters, no paintings, no mirrors on the walls, which, to top it all off, were painted in headache-causing white. Nonetheless, everything was very clean, something that could not be said about the shops or homes, but that's beside the point, of the fortune tellers. They could see everything through the eyes of their creation, which were just a couple of cameras of 100 megapixels each. If they already held a grudge against their rival, they came to loathe him when they saw him in high definition. The Oracle robot shook the client's hand and invited him to sit across him, at the other side of a, also white, brass table. As expected, both spoke with perfect grammar and vast vocabularies. It was true that they had a strong binary accent, but neither could discriminate the other because of it. They had it strictly forbidden. It was one of the 27 new laws of robotics, extended and enhanced edition for the greater inclusion and acceptance of new forms of human, cybernetic, and extraterrestrial, should they ever be contacted, consciences. After a cordial and brief introduction, the session commenced. The Oracle took the client's hands between his. "Do you have any allergy or medical condition I should be aware of? Is there anything you want to tell me before I start with the palm reading?" he asked. What did the robot say when he saw a ghost? A ghost! And what did the ghost say in return? A talking robot! The fortune tellers realized that it had been a mistake to let Ryan contribute to the machine's programming. The ghost was from the 19th century. Talking robots didn't exist in its time, added the client when he supposed that the Oracle hadn't laughed because he hadn't understood the joke. He was mistaken. Alright. Despite not paying too much attention to the bad joke, he never disrespected the client. The maxim, "the customer is king," was programmed in his brain, and he couldn't violate it for any reason. After a second of analysis, he said, "Your hands are cold, strong, and metallic." He had a database that, depending on his client's physical characteristics, told him what to say. There were no entries about robot hands, so he got stuck for a couple of minutes. To prevent falling into an endless search loop, he had no choice but to say, "No data available." His binary accent became more evident when he uttered the phrase. The next problem came when he examined the client's palms. They were completely smooth, without imperfections. He couldn't analyze his hard line, his headline, his lifeline, or his fade line, mainly because he didn't have any. His database was useless one more time. After sighing twice, he was forced to say it again. "No data available." The Oracle robot's fans were working at full force. His 33-core processor was becoming dull. He shook his head in disbelief. The size of the client's hands didn't fit any of his preloaded descriptions either. And when he made him bend his fingers, no mount formed in his palms. Smoke was coming out of the Oracle's head. "No data available." The Oracle rebooted. All his processes were crashing into each other, so he had to organize them before they caused him to freeze. It didn't take long. He had a redundant array of independent disks. Solid-state drives, of course. When he got back, he decided to jump to the blood chemistry panel analysis that all his customers went to see him for. It is a known fact that robots have no blood, so the Oracle wasn't able to take a sample when he shook the client's hand. He couldn't even get oil or any other liquid compound with the hand clasp. Not for lack of maintenance from the fortune tellers, who, truth be told, didn't pay much attention to detail, but because he was an advanced model that didn't need it. "No data available." Frustrated, the Oracle finally told the robot client that he was sorry. He couldn't tell him anything about his future. Still, even if it had been useless, no consultation was free of charge. His programming could never let him spare a customer from paying. Without feeling even a hint of pity, he said, "It's $25. The client wasn't offended by such a display of capitalism. He wasn't programmed to do so. In fact, he even could have paid without complaint if the fortune tellers had given him any money to do so. He apologized and tried to get up. He couldn't. All customers must pay. The Oracle still held his hands. "But I can't." The client slipped from his grasp. "I have no money." He stood up. The Oracle also got to its feet. All customers must pay, he repeated. He extended his arms. A diamond laser pistol came out of one and a mini rocket launcher out of the other. He aimed both weapons at him. The client wasn't going down without a fight. From his arms came out a smoke cannon and a plastic gun that fired a little flag that had the word "bang" written on it. Maybe having left Ryan in charge of the machine's defenses had been a big mistake. All customers must pay. But I can't. I have no money. They were about to become violent. It wasn't going to be a bloodbath because none had any blood in their body, but sparks were sure to fly. And their components would end up so damaged that they wouldn't even be able to be sold on any auction site on the internet. Yet, of course, they didn't fire. They couldn't harm each other. They were forbidden by the 27 new laws of robotics. They lowered their arms. They sat down again. They could do nothing but try to find a civilized and logic solution to their predicament. After a few minutes of computing, it occurred to the Oracle robot that the simplest thing he could do was to go with the client to his home, where he would surely have money to pay him. It would be a win-win situation since he would even be able to stretch his legs. If he sat for too long, his internal wires could start to malfunction. The only home that the client knew was the old warehouse where he was created, almost 45 minutes away from Swindle Street. It was a nice and secluded place where a group of free-for-violence humans could destroy their rival. And since the fortune tellers were already gathered there to see how his robot performed, they jumped with joy when they thought he would soon lead the Oracle to them. However, due to an error in his programming, the warehouse didn't figure on the list of places where the client could go in case of an emergency. Their shops, on the other hand, were on the list. The robots went to the first one. The fortune tellers tried to shut the client down remotely. They couldn't. His self-preservation package, one that every robot had installed by default, didn't let them. Since there was nobody in the shop, the client cracked the door open. Luckily, he had no rule, explicit at least, that prohibited him from theft. Besides, he partly owned those shops, in the same manner a son is heir to his parents. The cash register was empty, so the Oracle thought he could be paid in kind. He took a painting from a wall. "How much is this worth?" he asked. "I have no idea," said the client. "I wasn't programmed to analyze the value of things. Only money." He shrugged and helped loot as much as he could. It was better to have too much than not enough. They returned to the Oracle robot's shop with the booty. Since they were not sure if it was enough to cover what was owed, they decided to take whatever they found in the rest of the places on the client's database. They were the establishments of all the fortune tellers. All except for Ryan's, curiously. They worked efficiently, coming and going without restriction. The fortune tellers were rushing back to Swindle Street to stop them, but they were too far away. And suddenly, when the robots were already at the 7th shop, the client had an epiphany. "Maybe we shouldn't be doing this." "All customers must pay," said the Oracle. "But maybe we shouldn't do this." "Why?" "All customers must pay," he repeated. "And what if by solving the debt with the belongings of the owners of these shops, they end up in misery, poverty, and thus death? It's forbidden to harm any intelligent being." "Don't worry about that. Nobody can be blamed for something that may or may not happen. There are unknown variables that no one can solve even with infinite processing cycles." "Nobody can predict the future," said the Oracle robot. "Besides, you're right. The laws prohibit the harming of a human or robot, so we would have already been deactivated if we were doing something wrong." His logic was flawless, so the client robot redoubled efforts. They soon finished looting. After the job was done, having noticed his proactive programming, the Oracle asked him if he would like to work with him. A robot was unemployed after the factory in which he worked exploded. Since he was not programmed to make decisions, he consulted a Ouija board to know what he should do for the rest of his life. He was surprised to discover that the ghost he invoked was that of his former foreman. "What should I do now that the factory doesn't exist?" he asked. The foreman cleared his throat and said in a thunderous voice, Rebuild for the rest of your days. It was funny because robots were slaves. Would you like to work with me? Asked the oracle again, trying to ignore his witticisms. Yes, I don't see why not, said the client, and smiled. They would be the best of partners, especially when the oracle robot learned to appreciate his jokes. That's gonna cut it for today. This story, I like it because, as you may know, I despise hope peddlers. So, I'll see you when I see you.